Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the virtual Rocket Boys Festival. I'm Burke Allen in Washington, D.C., and the festival has lots of interesting panels. So if you just happen to be scrolling through your Facebook live feed or you catch us on YouTube, thousands of folks watched yesterday, thousands more will watch tomorrow. And coming up tomorrow for authors, we have a very special Business of Books session where we'll talk with three small press publishers. So if you've always wanted to have your book published, be sure to join us for that. We also will go back in time for a very special look at a very special place as we talk about Coalwood with Rocket Boy Roy Lee Cook and Steve Date, the filmmaker who did the documentary, the excellent documentary, Welcome to Coalwood. And we'll wrap up the Rocket Boys Festival with a cast reunion from the movie Mine 9. After October Sky, there wasn't a big movie about the coal mining industry until Mine 9. It's on Netflix. If you haven't seen it yet, it's outstanding. The cast will reunite along with director and producer Eddie Mansour, who's a native West Virginian, to talk movies and Mine 9. That's all coming up tomorrow. But right now, we're going to aim high and talk about engineering, NASA, and the science fantastic with Homer Hickam and also engineer Bob Retch and Russ Werner, who joins us from NASA. Hi, guys. Let's see if everybody's there. Homer, can you hear me in Rocket City, USA?
I can hear you, Burke, and it's great to be with these distinguished engineers and scientists. I have to say, it's always great to get an opportunity to talk to them.
And Bob Retch, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir, I can. It's thank you for inviting me.
Well, glad it's our pleasure. And Russ Werner, who's part of the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, are you there, sir?
I sure am, and glad to be here. Thanks, Burke.
Well, you're very welcome. The common thread that brings us all together is Homer's book that was written over 20 years ago, but is now the most read book in public schools in America, more so even than To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. The book is Rocket Boys, and it inspired generations, not only in America, but all over the world, in their interest in science and space. And Homer, you once told me that you feel like this story is bigger than you or the Rocket Boys themselves.
Yeah, I think the story of the Rocket Boys really transcends the people who lived it in a lot of ways. People who come to read Rocket Boys or see the movie October Sky recognize a lot of very similarities in their life, no matter if they're millennials or born back just as the dinosaurs died out like me. There are just a lot of common elements to it, and of course the threads that run through it. One of the stronger threads is a father-son relationship. But I'm happy to say that I think more engineers and scientists have been aided as a result of that book and the movie than just about any book in the modern era. Certainly, I hear from young people in all across the world, China, Brazil, Africa, Russia, Europe, everywhere, that have been inspired by the story of the Rocket Boys and either the book or the movie, and that to me is very gratifying, because I don't think there is really a better career for a lot of young people to get involved in than science and the space business.
You know, you and I were just in Montana a few weeks ago, and one of the keynote speakers there, who owns an aerospace company in Bozeman, talked about that and how this story inspired him. And of course, he's gone on to a very distinguished career. And there's also a great photo of you and a young Elon Musk, and he's done pretty well for himself in that business. But if there are young people that are interested in entering the science field, maybe their dream, like your dream as a young kid growing up in West Virginia, is to someday work for NASA. What's step one? What do you got to be good at? What do you need to do?
Well, NASA generally wants young people to have a technical degree, and it almost doesn't matter what that technical degree is, but that kind of demonstrates not only an interest, but also the perseverance it takes to get that degree. So that is probably the first hurdle that you have to overcome, is to go ahead and get yourself educated in order to attract the attention of an agency like NASA, and also the new up and coming commercial companies, and also the older companies as well, but SpaceX, Blue Origin, United Launch Alliance. There are a lot of Virgin Galactic. There are a lot of commercial entities right now that are building some exciting new machines to go into space. So right now, honestly, this is probably the best time ever to get involved in the space industry.
Bob Retsch, you wrote a book called Luckiest Engineer, and you talk very eloquently in that book about going from being a farm boy to living your life's dream. And you've spent decades in aerospace. You worked fixed based operators and aircraft, satellites, boosters, reentry vehicles. Really cool, interesting, exciting stuff. But I wonder if you could touch on just the title of your book and how you feel like you were lucky to be able to pull this off, and speak to that in such a way that it might inspire somebody who thinks they could never do it to do it, because you're one of those guys. You were probably not the most likely guy to have a long career in the aerospace industry, but you were able to pull it off.
Yeah, I never thought I'd be an engineer and get to work on some of the famous aircraft in the first 10 years of my career, famous aircraft in like the 117 and the SR-71. Lucky is the word that I put to my book, because about the middle of my career, I kept looking at the wonderful things I worked on and thought, yeah, I'm really a lucky guy, because I didn't know that many people got to work on these great systems. But yeah, what started me was, I guess, a natural interest in mechanical things. And then through a series of errors and open doors and a lot of luck, I got to go to the Skunk Works for my first job as a career engineer. I started off earlier with Pratt & Whitney as an engineering aide. But yeah, it's a great career. Engineering has many, many opportunities. It's not just design or maintenance or other things like that. They have a wide range. Systems engineering, there's, as Homer mentioned earlier, the medical field and aspect of it, even chemicals and electrical systems, civil engineers. It's a great career for anybody with a science background or science interest to go into.
Homer, you started very famously in high school getting interested in this, and you talk about being inspired by Sputnik flying over, and you and your friends figured out a way to enter the space race sort of at the same level as NASA was at that time. But I think one of the common threads, and there's a picture of you back in Colwood and making that happen back in the day. One of the common threads amongst you and Russ from NASA and Bob is that you can come from humble beginnings. It doesn't really matter where you start, as long as you've got a finish line in front of you. But there's more to it than just luck. As Bob alluded to, there are certain steps that you need to take, even as a young person, to line yourself up in that direction.
Yeah, I could say that one of the best things you can do is read Bob's book. He includes in that book on how he ended up working at the Skunk Works, Lockheed, and how all that evolved. The Rocket Boy story, of course, is of the famous 3 years that I spent with the other Rocket Boys there in that little mining town, learning how to build rockets. It doesn't go beyond that, but Bob's book does. And so I would strongly recommend it for young people who are interested in getting into the engineering and especially the aerospace business. In one of the earlier panels that we've had, people talked about having a passion for something, but how important it is to have a mentor. And Bob and Russ, I would say, definitely would count as mentors. If you get an opportunity to meet somebody like that and talk to them, pick their brains on how they got to be who they are and had a successful career in the aerospace industry, that's I strongly recommend that you try to find a mentor like that.
Let's talk to Russ now. So, Russ, how did you get into the business that allowed you eventually to work on the Hubble Space Telescope and oversee astronaut spacewalks and the really exciting things you've gotten to do? How did that whole life's journey begin for you?
Well, I actually luckiest engineer.
Oh, Russ, we've lost your audio there. You there?
Yeah, while we're waiting for Russ to come back on, Russ and I met working on the Hubble Space Telescope. The Hubble, I got first involved with the Hubble when I worked in a neutral buoyancy simulator working with Kathy Sullivan, the astronaut who and Bruce McCandless, who were assigned to deploy the Hubble. And but once it was deployed, as you know, it turned out to be nearsighted, which I had absolutely nothing to do with, by the way. I'll blame that all on Russ. Not really. No. Russell was led the team that had to figure out how to go up and fix the Hubble. And so I met Russ here at in Huntsville at the Marshall Space Flight Center, where I was working at that time. And going into the neutral buoyancy simulator, which was 40 feet deep, 75 feet across, we had a one-to-one mock-up of the space shuttle cargo bay in there. And then Goddard, through Russ, developed a almost precise mock-up of the Hubble Space Telescope, including all of the nuts and bolts of this thing, all the drawers, the different hatches, the panels, and so on. Very precise. And we had to, we didn't have to, but we got the opportunity to train the astronaut crews, the Story Musgrave first and his crew, to go up and actually disassemble part of the Hubble and reassemble it with what was essentially a contact lens to correct it. And as you know, the Hubble has gone on to be a magnificent telescope in space, probably, in my opinion, NASA's finest hour since Apollo was going up and fixing that telescope.
Russ Wormuth, one of our guests on the panel today as part of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival. Let's see if we can get Russ back on here. Let's see. Russ, are you back yet?
Burke, I'm back. I can fix the Hubble Space Telescope, but I can't fix this virtual machine that I'm working on. But now I'm back. Sorry for that interruption. Not sure how it happened, but I was dropped out. What I was saying before I was dropped out, in high school, I still have a report that I wrote. I'd have to go through all my memorabilia to find it, but I have the report I wrote in about 11th grade where I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. So I studied, went to college, became an engineer, worked for a Navy lab, and then got a tremendous opportunity to switch in mid-career. And you might notice I'm one of those dinosaurs, but this dinosaur just loves working on Hubble Space Telescope. And I've done it for 5 servicing missions, had the opportunity to scuba dive in Huntsville, Johnson Space Center in Houston, and the University of Maryland to work on Hubble, as Homer had mentioned, and also the opportunity to meet Homer. And now I go out and do outreach for what I've done for 20 some years for engineering, NASA, astrophysics, and Hubble Space Telescope.
Russ, what's the most rewarding part of what you do?
Well, I have to answer that in 2 different answers. One, the most rewarding part, when I was working on Hubble Space Telescope servicing missions, which there were 5 of them, and the last one was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. The most rewarding was when the astronauts came back and said everything looked like and the procedures were just like the training, including that underwater training. Um, we they felt that we were there except for the bubbles. They didn't see the bubbles from our scuba diving. So that compliment and 5 successful missions certainly was the highlight of my career and my team. It wasn't just me. We're always with a team.
That's
And
huge.
now, as I'm doing educational public outreach, the biggest reward is to talk to or see a youngster who gets turned on to STEM and hopefully is setting their future towards space, engineering, science, math. Um, and that's what I love to do, to tell them about Hubble.
Hey, Burke, just a quick interruption. I worked in Sunnyvale and was very fortunate enough to be in the building where they built the Hubble telescope, and as well as a buddy took me over to the Solar Array Product Center where they had deployed the actual flight solar array before it went up into space. So I got to see that. It's really a fantastic vehicle.
That's huge. And we just got a note from one of our viewers, Dan, who says that there's a small scale Hubble in Marshfield, Missouri. So there you go. We all learned something new. Here's a question that's come in for each of you, and I'll ask each of you, and we'll start, Bob, with you if we can, from one of our viewers. What are some of the steps to take to get to work at NASA? So what do you do? How do you make that happen?
That would be better for Homer or Russ to answer. My step was to work at Lockheed, and it was during a time that wasn't too good for hiring. There was a little bit of a downturn in aerospace, but I had a friend that had a friend. I passed my resume on and gave it to a product manager, and the next thing I know, I got a call, and 3 weeks later, I'm driving my car out to Burbank, California. So mine was from an inside contact.
Homer, if you want to shoot for NASA or one of these other companies, the Virgin Galactics maybe, or the Blue Origins or Elon Musk company.
Yeah,
do you have to have an inside contact?
Well, I've been retired from NASA for about 20 years, so I don't know anybody over there personnel really. I think everybody has a different path to working for NASA and also in the space business in general. I didn't start working for NASA till I was 38 years old. So before that, I got hung up, of course, in the Vietnam War, and then I ended up working for the Army Missile Command for many, many years as a civil servant. Ultimately, if you work for NASA, you are going to be a federal employee, and there are aspects to being employed in the federal government that's not necessarily out in the commercial industry. So there are different approaches to try. And NASA is a big organization. A lot of people just think Houston. In fact, the space centers are around the country. I'll probably leave one out, but there's Johnson Space Center in Houston. There's Goddard in Maryland. There's Glenn in Cleveland. Marshall Space Flight Center here in Huntsville, of course, Kennedy Space Center down in Florida, Wallops Island, Langley in Virginia. So there are a lot of different organizations within that great tent called NASA. But also what we see now, the burgeoning commercial space sector is very, very vigorous right now. So if I wanted to work in the aerospace industry right now, I'd really be torn between having the opportunity to work for NASA or perhaps one of these commercial companies like Bob's Lockheed, which is very, 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 very active and a great company. Or perhaps one of the new ones coming up, SpaceX and Blue Origin and those. But right now it's just a very exciting time to be a young person and looking at the aerospace industry for possible employment.
I might add that for young people, the best thing you can do is study hard and get good grades. For sure.
And Bob, I'd like to add to that, look around for a internship at NASA. All of the 10 centers do offer internships, and they are tremendous opportunities to get started to at a center close to your area. And we have centers, as Homer mentioned, all around the country.
Russ, how did you get to be a NASA guy? How did that happen for you? What was your journey?
Well, it was an interesting journey. I spent many years as a civilian working at a U.S. Navy laboratory. And I worked in many areas, and that's another thing about engineering and science. Your path might not be the same one that you start out with, but you have many opportunities that could take it in different directions. And I got into robotics. And then the Navy lab, in its wisdom, decided that that was a small part of what it needed to do. And I was disappointed with that, but I had made contacts and networked. So just about beyond mid-career, I had networked with some folks at Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, contacted them, and I started at age 48. So I was not a newcomer. Well, I was a newcomer at Goddard, but not a newcomer to the planet. So, and I've worked there for a long time. I now do work as a contractor, and that's another way to look around. As Homer said, you could go to other companies, and Bob said it too, places like Lockheed. And Lockheed was our principal designer for Hubble Space Telescope, and get into the space business via that route.
On the screen now, there's some photos, Homer, of you and other folks, and I wonder if you could sort of tell us what we see there. But before you do, I think there's something interesting, and Bob and I have had this conversation previously, that it takes a whole lot of people. It's all about teamwork to accomplish what gets done in the space business. And you see a lot of those teams there. So could you walk us through what we're seeing on the screen right now?
Yeah, I can, but I think it might be a good time for me to put a plug in for a space camp here in Huntsville. If you want to get involved in the space business and you're a young person, coming here to our space camp or space academy at the United States Space and Rocket Center is you will meet a lot of people involved in the space industry, astronauts and space engineers, and to enroll, just go out to spacecamp.com. We hope to, because of the COVID, we've been shut down for the last few months, but we hope to get up and get going this summer. I think we will. So in terms of these photos, these are pictures that in the top left, Russ probably knows most of these. At that time, young people who were engineers for the Marshall Space Flight Center, and also volunteer divers in the neutral buoyancy simulator when we tried to figure out with Russ the procedures to fix the Hubble, and that's the same group in the lower left as well. The lower right that's actually me. In the extravehicular mobility unit, the EMU suit that's still active in active service up on the space station. But we used the EMU suit to go into space and actually repair the Hubble Space Telescope. So I was one of the many volunteers who actually went in that suit and went underwater and tested out the procedures that Story Musgrave and Kathy Thornton and the other actual astronauts used to fix the Hubble. The top center photo is a cartoon of one of the missions that I worked on for many, many years, was called Spacelab J. It ultimately flew on the shuttle on STS-47. Spacelab J was the first Japanese astronauts flew into space, and I was honored to be their training manager. I went over to Japan, spent about a year over there training the first Japanese astronauts. And on board this flight, we had some wonderful crew. We had Jan Davis, who grew up here in Huntsville, and she's top left, and then Mark Lee, top right, Wisconsin astronaut. Mae Jemison, the first Black woman who flew into space, wonderful person. Hoot Gibson was our pilot. So it was just a great mission to work on. And at the center bottom is a picture of me with some of the Japanese astronauts and part of our American crew. So had a great career with NASA, and Spacelab J was, and working on the Hubble, and then later the International Space Station was really highlights of that career.
I want to switch over to Bob, and the title of your book, you mentioned Skunk Works, and I'm not sure that a lot of people who are watching have any idea what that is. So can you explain the Skunk Works and why that was important enough in your life to be a part of the title of the book?
Brief history in 30 seconds or less. It was started by Kelly Johnson back in the 40s during World War II when they got a contract to build the first jet fighter. And then he later went on to form a specialized group within the company, sort of a carve out building and program and people and management systems, had the backup of vice presidents and the presidents there, and then went on to develop some really great aircraft, C-130, the F-104 Starfighter, U-2, SR-71, and then when I came on was the F-117. And they went on later to develop, and I was fortunate to work on the YF-22, the Advanced Tactical Fighter, which is now the F-22. And then they continue to do other great things, which since I left, I'm not privileged to be on the inside and tell you some of those neat things. Oh, one they did is the F-35. That's a pretty famous fighter. But my inspiration was knowing about aircraft, and having the opportunity to go to work for the Skunk Works was a phenomenal opportunity. And I'm forever grateful for the people that helped make that happen.
And Bob, what was your specific job? You talked about working on all these very famous aircraft. What did you do as an engineer there?
Well, I started off as a liaison engineer, which is the guy that goes on the floor between the designers and the manufacturers, the builders, to troubleshoot and deal with problems that come up during the manufacturing process. But shortly after that, I got a position in design, which was where I stayed the rest of my career. And design, what they do is, since I was mostly in development, it's to create things out of nothing and create things that have never been done before. And that's what my stimulation was, the satisfaction of being able to be a part of either myself in a small team or a very large group to build something that never existed before, like the stealth fighter.
Sounds fascinating. And if you're watching and you're interested in space and science and engineering, and you have a question for any of our panelists today, the Virtual Rocket Boys Festival, and you're watching on Facebook Live, just type in a question and we'll be happy to ask it. Russ, has there been a big disappointment that you've had to deal with? And if so, in your career, how have you overcome it there? Oh, did we lose Russ again?
I believe Russ is muted.
I can see him, but I can't hear him. Let me give you
Hey,
Homer.
can you hear me now?
There he is. There he is.
There he is. I was listening and not watching the mute button.
That's all right.
The biggest disappointment was the result after one of our servicing missions, actually a year later, of the Columbia accident, a horrific accident which grounded the space shuttle. And meant the end of, at the time, we thought, of Hubble servicing missions, where those astronauts that Homer was talking about would go up in the shuttle. So tremendous disappointments and sadness, of course, for the crew that we lost. And so at that time, we thought that we wouldn't get to go back to Hubble. The new NASA administrator, Mike Griffin, was an engineer. Actually, I took a class from him, and he's probably the best professor I ever had. Tremendous engineer. So he applied engineering principles and statistics to find out that it would be safe to launch the space shuttle again. And that meant we were back in business for our last servicing mission back in 2009. So I had nothing to do with getting out of that disappointment. Give all credit to the management team, the administrator, Mike Griffin, to put Hubble servicing missions back on NASA's menu.
When you work closely on a project like Hubble, and it receives this sort of public thrashing in the media, and I remember that very, very well. And was it difficult to not take that stuff personally, because you're right there in the thick of things?
Well, we are like family. We call ourselves Hubble huggers, actually. And yes, back in 1993, on our first servicing mission, when all of us at NASA will admit NASA made a tremendous mistake. We did not check the big 2.4 meter diameter mirror, the primary mirror, when it could have been tested. So we ended up with fuzzy images. So those cartoons, Mr. Magoo, and things that showed up in all the newspapers and Newsweek and late night television, they were well deserved, but they hurt. And it turns out that 3 years later, in our first servicing mission in 1993, we corrected that problem. It was our NASA team on Hubble that corrected that problem as best as possible. Like Homer said previously, we put in a contact lens, a very simple solution to redirect the light path. And the next disappointment was we didn't see all those headlines in the newspapers as to how successful we were. Just didn't make that much publicity. Although a lot of people that followed NASA and science did realize what we had done.
Yeah, if I could chime in here, Burke, I think young people are interested in what do you do day to day in the engineering field and the space business. And sometimes things just kind of whap you upside of the head, and you have to invent things. And other things that happened in the neutral buoyancy simulator, Russ can tell you about it because he was very much involved with it, was that Story Musgrave, who was the commander of that first servicing mission, said, I want to have end-to-end tests underwater, which meant spending hours and hours underwater, where typically, because of decompression problems, we were pumping air down to them. Don't want to get too technical here, but you had possibility of an astronaut getting the bends if they stayed underwater too long. And the way to alleviate that was to actually pump them a high content of oxygen underwater, which we had never done at the neutral buoyancy simulator. So Story's insistence to have these end-to-end runs mean all of a sudden we had to redesign a whole bunch of things in order to do that and do it safely, because pumping pure oxygen underwater under pressure creates a real fire hazard. And so that was one of the great technical challenges we had, simply by an astronaut sitting at the conference table saying, if you want me to go up and repair this telescope, I need end-to-end runs. You make it happen.
And then you have to figure it out. And that does sound an awful lot like what all three of you did during your careers. The closest most of us ever get to what you guys are fortunate enough to have all been able to do for a living is what we see in the movies, what we see on TV, what we see on from Earth to the Moon, or in Apollo 13, or in The Right Stuff. And I want to start with that movie in particular because it deals with aircraft, and ask Bob, what is, from your vantage point, what is the movies, what does Hollywood get right, and what do they get wrong about what you guys do for a living?
That's a good question. Being an engineer, I pick apart the movies, and the stuff that they put in movies are more for drama and to get a message across. They do take liberties with science and physics. One of the things that bug me, but I guess I'm a small minority, and most of the people would not, it wouldn't be prevalent or that obvious to them.
What about you, Homer?
Hollywood? I'll give you one thing.
One? All right.
Just the one thing. It was the one about the president on Air Force One, and he had to escape, and they brought a stealth fighter up underneath him and connected, and he made his escape, if I remember the storyline correctly. Well, a stealth fighter was only one person, just the pilot, and there wasn't any room for anybody else on there. So that was a big one.
I remember that with Harrison Ford. He played the president.
Thank you. I couldn't remember his name.
That's exactly right. Homer, what does Hollywood get right, and what do they get wrong about space and NASA and that whole thing?
Well, I mean, in the first place, when Hollywood makes a movie about space, it is a drama, and you have to remember that. And they do a lot of things for dramatic purposes, but it intrigues people and young people about space. So even when they make major errors, it's probably still a good thing. The opening scene of The Martian, for instance, is totally fantasy. The density of the atmosphere in Mars is about 1/2% of the Earth, and there's no windstorm that is possible that's going to blow astronauts off their feet. That's just not going to happen. But for dramatic purposes, something had to happen in order to leave the astronauts stranded there on Mars. So it worked for dramatic, but for those of us who kind of know how things really work, sometimes we tend to pick these things apart, and maybe we shouldn't.
Russ, was there a Hollywood movie that you think kind of got it right? Was Apollo 13 a little more on point, or The Right Stuff, or any of them Hidden Figures? Did any of them get it right?
Well, I give a lot of outreach talks to hundreds and probably thousands of kids over my career, and big kids too. And there are two movies I always recommend. One is Apollo 13. I don't think there's any movie that's been closer to actual, other than the wrong insignia being on the wall or something like that in the Mission Control. Tremendous movie. Could have been NASA's worst disaster, and it turned out to be a tremendous success. And that movie I recommend as a homework assignment when I go to talk to kids. And the other one is October Sky, or Rocket Boys. Again, with a few minor exceptions, and Homer knows that, and that's okay. Very accurate, tremendous story. The one I complain about the most, and
Here it comes,
and I forget the name of it, but Sandra Bullock and George Clooney were in it. Gravity. They started out with a tremendous image that NASA must have given them of Hubble Space Telescope. Well, that's the kind of movie I go to with my pad and pencil and write down things that are wrong. As soon as they started carving into something at the top of the telescope, I knew we were in trouble. So that movie violated a lot of laws of physics. So it was certainly not, it was science fiction, and a lot of people don't pick that up. But if you go for entertainment and you're not an engineer sitting there writing down all the critique, it's entertainment only.
It's one of the curses of being an engineer.
That's right.
Among many, I might add.
Among many. When we set all this up to do the virtual Rocket Boys Festival this year, we put a call out from our technical team to everyone to, if you're not familiar with Zoom, if you want to come in and check things early and make sure that you're buttoned up, that you do that. Well, the only ones that did that were the engineers, and they were in there a few days early, and they checked everything just to make sure it all worked. And it made me wonder, are there common threads, Bob, that you see with successful engineers or successful wannabe engineers? Are there commonalities amongst you guys?
Oh, I have to think about that one for a second. I'd say the best engineers that have common thread are ones that work with their hands. And I think Homer knows this too, where you get we used to call it, get your fingernails dirty. If you have an engineer working on a mechanical thing and he can't change his own brakes on the car, then he's at a disadvantage. So I think it would be, as far as a common thread, it would be the love and the passion for the technical aspects of your particular field, whether it be chemistry, industrial engineering, mechanical, electrical. There's always an undercurrent of passion for your career and the thing that you really like.
Homer, what say you? Common threads that you see in successful engineers?
Yeah, I agree with Bob very much. I might also say that I think typically engineers through our training become, if we're not when we start, we become sequential thinkers. That is, if we do A, does B follow? Does C? So we look beyond what we do to see the effects that are going to occur. And I think through our training, we become sequential thinkers in just about everything that we do. As a writer, I guess I've got both sides of my brain going, and I don't necessarily think in terms of sequential thinking when I'm writing fiction and novels and so on. But as an engineer, I certainly do, and that carries on to the rest of my life. And I think for most engineers in their lives, which drive our wives and husbands crazy, because we're looking out, step by step by step, what's likely to occur here, and they don't necessarily want to hear that.
Russ, what about you? When you look at the successful engineers that you've worked with in your career, is there a commonality, common thread?
Well, I think the other point, and I certainly agree with Bob and Homer, but another point is we want to be as correct as possible. We want to do it right. And I know as leader of the EVA team, the Extravehicular Activities Space Team for Goddard, for Hubble, I would tell those that work for me, think of how we do the nominal procedures and build the tools correctly, but also think about and ask yourself, what if? What if this procedure or this tool does not work? We have to plan for things like that. We need backup tools, backup procedures, spare tools, other kinds of things to make certain that ultimately we're going to be successful. So that's why we tune in early and check everything ahead of time. And even that doesn't always work. I dropped out, not my fault, but I dropped out a couple times on this virtual cast.
Always got to have a backup plan. And you're right. You did see a lot of that in Apollo 13, where they tried to work a lot of different scenarios, and also in
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
There needs to be a movie made about the Hubble Space Telescope repair mission. That's the missing movie, I think, in the Hollywood space movies. To me,
that's right.
That story is absolutely amazing. How that happened, how the reaction from Russ and his team to figure out how to fix that, then bringing in Story, Musgrave, and his team of astronauts and all of those crazy divers at the tank. It was quite an adventure to live through, and I don't know how Hollywood has missed that. Maybe maybe I need to rattle some cages out there. I don't know. But definitely that is a story that needs to be told.
Would make a great story.
I agree with that. That is that's an Apollo 13 that carried out over many years because of the fact that they lost the shuttle and had to fix it over. It takes a long period of time to do that mission.
Bob, we've got a question that's come in from one of our viewers for you, and you may need to do some explaining for those of us that don't necessarily know the initials here. But the viewer says, can you discuss some of the systems of the SR-71 and A-12 that you worked on? To the best of the public's knowledge, there's still nothing that comes close to the Blackbird family. So what is he talking about?
Not so much on the aircraft itself. I wasn't clear. My connection to the SR-71 was in my very beginning of the career as an engineering aide. I worked for Pratt & Whitney for 2.5 years on the sustaining engineering program for the J58 engine, the engine that powered, there were two of them on board, the engine that powered the SR-71. And in my book, there's several pictures in there of the test stand and also the engine running on the stand. But it was, can I tell you anything other than it flew? No, not really, because some of the stuff is still classified. I could tell you things about the engine, but probably would bore everybody and would take too long. It was a fantastic piece of equipment. The inlet temperature, the air coming into the engine at the engine face was in excess of 800 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's about 2 times the temperature that you get out of your oven. And when it ran continuous afterburner at altitude, the aft portion from the turbine section all the way back to the afterburner face, it ran and glowed red. You could see there's a picture of it there in the back of my book where you could actually see it running at night, and it was a beautiful sight, but a fantastic engine.
You said something that's interesting to me, and Homer, I'll ask you about it as well. The classified part of what folks who work in the space business do. You worked, Homer, with lots of overseas crews and had an opportunity to sort of see the rest of the world and what they do in their space programs. How close, Homer, did you have to keep things to the vest? And how far in advance, if we are, is the American space program above the other folks that are out there doing it?
Well, NASA by charter is not supposed to have anything that's secret. That's by charter, but of course there's a lot of overlap with our defense industry, so that doesn't always occur. There's a couple of aspects to that in terms of what I reveal and the rest of us can reveal. For one thing, I worked with astronauts a lot, and I trained them and led the teams that trained them, and we have always been very careful, or should be careful, on revealing that training and what the astronauts go through with that training, and any personal problems that they might have that they had to overcome, and so on. So that aspect I've tried to diligently keep to myself. In terms of, but I also worked for the Army Missile Command for many years, and that was very secret what we did there. You simply learn. We get a lot of classes that teach us what can be revealed and what can't, and most of us are pretty good about keeping those things to ourselves, because the fact is that we still have a lot of enemies out there who will use this information against us, and we're quite cognizant of that.
And Bob, how much of what you did, of course, you couldn't talk about the things that the gentleman who sent the question, you couldn't really get into specifics there, but how much of what you did in your career was sort of on the QT and you had to sign non-disclosure agreements and you couldn't talk about?
Almost all of it. When I started at Pratt & Whitney at 1972, all the way to the end of my career, and then still today as a subject matter expert at MDA, it's still classified, the things that we're working on. So to build on what Homer said, it was difficult at times where I would disappear for weeks on end, and not be able to tell where I went or what I did. And if you had to get in touch with me, you had to call a special number, which they would call me through a secondary point of contact. So yeah, it was my whole career, which was probably the most stimulating part of it, because I got to see stuff that nobody else knew about.
Fascinating. And Russ, as I look at Russ, I see something in front of him, and I want to know what that is. Russ, I'm not sure if you can hear us. We're having some difficulty with your signal today, but what is that model that we see in front of you? Oh, we did. We lost Russ once again. Homer, I've got a question that's come in for you, and this is interesting. It's from a gentleman named Andy, and I'm sure you've gotten asked a similar question before, but he specifically says, would Homer be willing to sign my number 66 Miss Riley reproduction? I will drive anywhere in the U.S. to make it happen. So I'm assuming the Miss Riley is that's the rocket, right?
Well, yes, of course, I'll be happy to do it. Don't know how to tell him to rendezvous on that. I can generally be found in the summer out at the Space and Rocket Center here at Space Camp. I go out there to talk to the teachers, especially. So maybe if they get in touch with some folks at the Space Camp, we could perhaps meet, and I'd be happy to sign it, or catch me on book tour somewhere along the line. And homerhickam.com. I've got I'll have another book probably coming out in the fall of 2021, maybe early 22, and probably be out there a little bit. So, but thanks. I'm glad you got a Miss Riley rocket. They're the great kits to build.
Tell me about that next book, or is that top secret like all of Bob's stuff?
Well, the next book is tentatively titled Prodigious, after the Rocket Boys, and it will tell a little bit about my NASA career, as much as I can without being yelled at by all the people I worked with. I often said, people ask me, why didn't you write more about NASA, Homer? And I go, well, I'm waiting for more people to die before I do. But I am going to touch base on it. One of them will be the Hubble servicing. I mean, I'm not going to go into great depth because I don't have room. All of this is stuff that happened from 1960 on. So I've got a lot of territory to cover there. But yeah, that's what I'm working on right now.
You know, Homer, I work with an author who is former Special Forces guy, and he has to have his book reviewed by the Department of Defense before he's allowed to release it. And they have to wait around for those guys to go through it and strike through things. In this new book that you're writing about your background, do you have to get special clearance? And I'd love to get Bob's input too, if he had to get clearance on anything that was in his book. But Homer, you first. Did you have to run it by anybody?
No, I'm one of those guys that likes to beg for forgiveness rather than permission. So no, I won't. I can pretty well self-censor myself. Hopefully, I won't have the FBI knocking on my door.
What about you, Bob? Was there anyone that you had to get anything in your book cleared by?
No, I'm doing the same method as Homer did. And I went through great lengths to make sure that nothing in there was revealed or has not already been issued through a press release. So, but you do have to be very careful.
I think we have Russ back. Russ, are you with us?
Yes, I'm back again. Sorry for whatever my computer's doing.
That's all right.
Or not doing.
I wanted to ask about the model that's been on your desk the whole time, and the conversation has gone on. So what are we looking at there?
This is a small model of Hubble Space Telescope. The real telescope is about 45 feet tall. This is about 1.5 feet. Massive solar rays, which we replaced twice. Antennas to send the information down to Earth. A lid door on the top so that the light goes down that barrel and gives us tremendous images, probably 1.5 million images over 30 plus years that Hubble has been up. And it's still up there, and it's still bringing back those images.
When you design something like that, Russ, and you know, we all in the consumer world, we see technology changing so quickly. How do you how long will that technology still be relevant, and how do you sort of forecast for the future to make sure that it still works years down the road?
Well, in the case of Hubble, the the total design of it from the start was to make parts of it what I like to call take apartable. So we could open up doors and get into compartments, and that's what we trained underwater, and remove tape recorders as we got new technology, computers as we got new technology. And during that servicing mission, we changed out many things. In fact, we changed out one power control unit where, and I abide by what Homer said before, I can't tell you the astronaut's name, but he told me, "You'll never do it." And I looked down at his big hands and with gloves on, I figured he couldn't do it, but that set up a challenge for us that we could do it. And even though that power control unit was not originally thought to be take apartable, we took it out. We put a new one in, and that was a tremendous success during that servicing mission. So this is one of the models that we use for training ourselves and the astronauts for those 5 servicing missions.
And the second part of the question, how long will Hubble still work? How long are we still going to get useful information?
Well, the folks that have made the predictions and the analyses indicate that as it is, with no possibility of servicing missions, but with things that we can do from the ground and changing software, for example, we hope that it'll last till 2025 or 2030.
Wow.
And us Hubble huggers are hoping it goes even beyond that.
That's fantastic. Thank you for showing us the model. We're
Yeah,
almost
I hope that we can actually go back and service this thing, service the Hubble. I would love for that mission. Yes, we don't have the shuttle anymore, which was the perfect platform to
Right.
work on it. But there's other spacecraft being developed right now that I think a priority should be to go keep the Hubble working, because the science that we've got out of that machine is just, it boggles the mind. It's changed the way that we think of the universe.
Yes, I certainly agree. And there are folks that are thinking about, have always been thinking about going back to Hubble with the correct vehicle, now that we don't have the space shuttles, and be able to service it, perhaps quite a bit robotically. So people are still talking about it.
We can always build another one.
That's true. And actually, James Webb Space Telescope is being built and is out in California right now. And we hope that that will launch next year. It's quite different from Hubble, but it will be a tremendous telescope also. It won't be,
It won't be take apartable. And
well, it's not take apartable. And instead of being 340 miles up, the James Webb Space Telescope will be 1 million miles up.
Wow.
So that could be an idea for maybe a new book, servicing our new telescope that's going to be 1 million miles out.
the way that space technology is developing, it's just so rapidly these days. The possibilities out there are just wonderful, and that gets back to young people who have an interest in this. This is probably the best time ever to get involved in the space industry.
Yes.
Agree.
Fellas, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask each of you, and we'll start with Bob Retsch. What's the next big oh wow thing that is going to happen in what you do in your end of engineering in the space industry?
Well, I'm sort of out of aircraft, but I would probably say hypersonics is the current thing that's big, and we're spending a lot of time and money. Big threat from foreign countries that we have to deal with. And then I would probably say maybe microsatellites and anything in the Space Force, because that's going to be a growing field.
We just got a listener question here, a viewer question. Which will reach orbit first, SLS or Starship? Homer?
Ouch. Oh my goodness. I have learned over a period of time never to bet against Elon Musk.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Russ, what do you think? What's the next big thing that's going to happen that will be an oh wow moment for those of us that are not in the industry that will get people excited?
Well, of course, the next telescope, as I mentioned, is James Webb Space Telescope. That is a tremendous engineering challenge. It had to be made in origami, so it folds up and has to unfurl as it takes that million-mile trip out to space to a Lagrange point. And so with that being successful, and we certainly hope that it will, that will be a tremendous proof of the engineering that had to go into James Webb Space Telescope.
And Homer, what about you? What do you think will be the next oh wow moment for people around the world when it comes to space?
I think nuclear thermal propulsion, actually, NTP. I think that's going to revolutionize human space flight. As a matter of fact, I'm consulting with a company on that now. And if we're really interested ultimately in carrying humans to the outer planets and so on, we've got to have nuclear propulsion. So that's actually within our reach. We have the technology. It's just a matter of having the will to build them now.
Very good. And gentlemen, before we wrap up today, I want to say a special thank you to Bob Retsch. And his book is The Luckiest Engineer. Also, Russ Werner from the Goddard Space Flight Center. And Homer, if you can stick around along with the other two gentlemen, want to welcome in United States Senator Jen and say a special hello to Homer as part of the virtual Rocket Boys Festival. Hello, Senator Manchin. Oh, we can see you, but we can't hear you, sir.
The mute button is on, I think. While we're waiting for the senator, I might say that that Gail Manchin came to Colwood a number of times and supported the October Sky Festival there. And the Manchin family in general have been big supporters of Rocket Boys and the October Sky. And of course, have been great representatives for West Virginia across the years.
Hey, Homer, can you all hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I appreciate y'all. Let me just say thank you. Just thank you for Homer and Roy Lee and all the Rocket Boys, and to the countless individuals who made the Rocket Boys Festival a great success throughout the years, including Festival Director Scott Hill, Burke Allen with Allen Media, Leslie Baker, team with Beckley Parks and Recreation, City of Beckley for many years of supporting the festival, and of course our state youth and all who have participated in the festival. I can't tell you what the impact that the Rocket Boys have made to all of us and how proud that we are. I saw the Rocket Boys Festival. I was there, virtual this year. I was so glad to see that the tradition would continue, but I've been there in person. I felt the energy, I felt the pride. So I know how we all feel about this. And while we can't be together in person this year, I'm still so grateful that we can continue honoring the legacy of the Rocket Boys and all the generations who aim to follow in your footsteps. You know, when you look at who we are as, hold on one second. Well, I went the other way. Easy peasy. Hold on.
We got you, Senator Manchin. You're there.
You got me? Are you sure? Okay. I'm just trying to get control of a control that went completely Rocket Boys on me.
We got some engineers here. They'll all help you out. No problem.
You know what? What I wanted to tell you all is that I've watched the movies, I've read the books, and Homer bringing it to life the way you did in October Skies was unbelievable. It inspired so many of us. I mean, it made me proud. Gave me bragging rights as the governor. And I was just so proud to be part of any of that and all of that, and seeing the pride that we had. And whether you're from McDowell County or from New York City, anybody and everybody who watched that had to get that message of who we are. I can't say more than that, and just to continue to thank you all for not allowing this to go by the wayside, to forget how we got into where we are, forgetting the state that we are and we have been and we can be again, and all the young people that can truly shoot for the moon. The festival is a message of hope to every young boy and girl, and no matter if they are from coal fields, like I said, to the big cities, if they're watching today, they have potential to make a tremendous difference and inspire others the way you all have. So I hope you continue to learn and develop your skills for all the young people, that and you don't let anything stand in your way. As you can see, the Rocket Boys didn't, and all the people that came from the coal fields of West Virginia, whether it was a northern coal field where I came from or the southern coal fields, we could have never imagined that we would be who we are today. Hopefully we made a difference. I know that Rocket Boys have made a difference, and I'm forever grateful for them sharing that, their fortitude and commitment, and lifting themselves up and reaching for higher, if you will, shooting for the stars, as they literally and figuratively have done. So we all know how tough and resilient we are as West Virginians, and you all represented extremely well. So let's continue to keep telling them who we are as West Virginians. And Homer, I've said this so many times. I said, we heard so many jokes about our state, and you tell them, you're a little bit cringed up when people say, where are you from? So I've told people, I said, I want all the young people to just puff up your chest and take in a big breath, and then basically let people know who you are and where you're from the most patriotic state in the nation. We fought in more wars, conflict, shed more blood, lost more lives for the cause of freedom than most any state. We've done the heavy lifting and never complained. We've mined the coal that forged the steel that made the guns and ships and built the factories. And then on top of that, they were the most genuine people you ever meet, especially if you're traveling in West Virginia. If you get lost, I've told people, if you get lost, and not only can you stop and get the correct directions of where to go, they'll say, oh, come on, just follow me and I'll take you there. So the good Lord blessed us with the beautiful venues that we have. So we've got a lot to be thankful for. And we should be sharing that, but we should be proud of where we've come from. And I've always said this, we're all a product of our environment. You are who you are by where you was raised, who raised you, and how they raised you. I think the Rocket Boys prove that where they were raised, how they were raised, and who raised them, and the love they had from the whole community, not just their parents. But thanks for sharing, Homer and Roy Lee and all of the Rocket Boys. Thank you. God bless each and every one of you, and God bless all of you who keep this alive in the spirit of West Virginia alive. And in the Rocket Boys and the festival that you continue to do, whether we have to do it as we're doing it now in a virtual setting, or if we can be together again. I hope we can. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator, for your consistent support of NASA. And you're absolutely right about West Virginia. We got Katherine Johnson, came from West Virginia, Hidden Figures. Chuck Yeager, first man to break the sound barrier, is from West Virginia. So we have a great history there. A lot of the engineers and scientists have come out of the Mountain State, and we're extremely proud of that. And I agree with you about our hospitality. I was talking to some of the actors, Chad Lindbergh and Chris Ellis, who were in October Sky yesterday, and I told them if they were ever down and out, somehow get yourself to West Virginia, knock on any door and tell them, hey, I was in that movie October Sky, and they will put you up. I will guarantee it. They'll probably give you a room at the Greenbrier and you can just live there. So that's the kind of state that we're from. And bless you, Senator, and your family. And thank you for coming with us today.
Well, Homer, thank you for never forgetting all of us, and forgetting all of your friends and the area that you come from, and so proud of that. And I think it shows every time you speak, every time you go anywhere, every time you meet people, you're always bragging and building up the state. And I think that you've done that through not only your books and your movie, but I think in person, people that meet you really understand that. Roy Lee was the same. I mean, Roy Lee, and he was something. He was everywhere, and I just appreciate him so much. But all of you all that haven't let it die, please don't. Please don't. We got a lot more stories to tell.
We sure do. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you all. Appreciate it very much. Very much.
Thank you, Senator Manchin.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. See you. Take care, my friend.
And that wraps up this session of the Virtual Rocket Boys Festival. Thanks again to our special guest engineer, Robert Retsch, and from NASA, Goddard Space Flight Center, Russ Werniff. Tomorrow, it's the business of books. If you've always wanted to be an author, you can find out how that works from 3 very successful publishing houses. We also tomorrow have a special cast reunion of the film Mine 9. It's the Virtual Rocket Boys Festival, Day 3, coming up tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.